Sometime after 2 a.m. on a cold November evening, Pedro was alarmed by a knock on the door. He rushes out of bed, throws on some sweatpants and a t-shirt that were at the foot of his bed. Though he was startled by the knock, he was not asleep. He couldn't sleep. This had become normal for Pedro. Sleepless nights. As he heads to the door, walking through the hall, he stops to take a peek inside his daughter's room to see if they are awake. The knock, after all, was pretty loud. He gets to the door, peeks through the peephole, and sees two officers standing on the other side. His heart begins to sink, as if he knows why they are there. He takes a deep breath as he begins to turn the knob. Then he slowly opens the door. "Mr. Ochoa?" says one of the officers. Yes. How can I do for you?" Pedro softly replies. Hello everyone, and welcome to 10,000 Tacos. I'm Isidro Salas. And today on the show, we tell you a story about a couple. A young couple who met at a nightclub. The same nightclub where we used to sell tacos all those years ago. It's a story of love. It's a story of tragedy. And it's perhaps a story of forgiveness without having to say it. Now, a little bit about Pedro. Pedro was probably our first customer. Our first tacos customer, to be more specific. It was in the early 80s when my mother and father decided to start selling tacos on the weekends. Where we used to live, we had a neighbor whose dad was the owner of the nightclub called El Metro. This neighbor, because he used to see the truck parked on our driveway almost every day, suggested to my dad that for a small fee he can park his truck next to the club and sell food. Tacos and burritos, to be more honest. It was a win-win. I suspect Pedro was one of our first customers because by the time I met him, parents seemed to know him very well. He was always striking up good conversations with them, and they just seemed like they were good friends. So I figured he must have been one of the first ones they met when they started parking there. Pedro was like 5'6", average height for a Mexicano. He was always smiling, but because of his thick mustache, he looked like a very mean person. He always wore this white V-neck shirt that seemed a little tight. Maybe it was by design. Maybe he wanted to show off his little cohetes, his little rockets. I'm referring to his arms. His big arms, or so he thought. The first time I saw him, I remember thinking he looked like Yosemite Sam. You know, Bugs Bunny's not-so-better half. But Pedro was cool. Again, he seemed to always strike up conversations with my dad. So I thought this guy was not me. Now, Pedro was always showing up early and ordering some tacos at around 9 p.m. And then he was always showing up at the end of the night, which was a little bit after 2 a.m. when the club was closing. He'd always order tacos de sesos. He loved his sesos. He's probably the reason why we offered them. My dad used to call them tacos de inteligencia, implying that if you eat them, they will make you smarter. Now, you're probably wondering, what is sesos, or what are sesos? Well, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, Sesos are brain. The beef brains. Yeah, I'll give you a couple of seconds to digest that. No pun. Now, they even look like them. I mean, as you take them out and unpackage them before you cook them. Yeah. It is an acquired taste and maybe a delicacy. I don't know, but, just before you start judging, right? There was a time, a long time ago, when lengua, tacos de lengua, or even tripas were seen in similar fashion. And look what the latest taco craze has done to those. I'm just saying, I'm just observing. Tacos de tripa are a lot more popular than they once were. I don't know if Sesos will have the same fate, but anyway, on one ordinary evening, just a typical evening, at the end of the night, or I'd rather you'd say early morning, right? Because it's 2 a.m. Pedro comes to the truck with this lady, a big lady. A white girl. I mean, she's a big white girl. Now, Pedro wasn't tall, so she was noticeably quite bigger than him. I suspect she's probably like 6'1", which is pretty tall for a woman, right? She's busty, got puffy hair, and she seems very blushy, right? Like kind of bashful, shy, Her voice definitely does not match the size. I mean, the height. That's what I meant to say. Julie. He introduces her to us with pride, with enthusiasm. I mean, he was like, this is my lady. He was really, really, really happy to introduce her to us. He orders 2 tacos de carne asada. And I'm like, wait a minute. He usually orders sesos. He says, con todo, por favor, which means with everything. And then he orders 2 carne asada sin nada, just the meat. Clearly, they are for her. I found this a little strange after all again. I was just a little bewildered simply because he was always ordering his sesos. I'm guessing he's probably a little embarrassed that he's ordering sesos and perhaps he just doesn't want to explain to her what they really are. It might be a put-off. Those are just my suspicions. Now, you can tell he's really, really digging on her. There is no shortage of reciprocation. She is just as delighted and excited to be right next to him. It's like tacos at first sight. For the next couple of weeks, they come earlier and earlier, meaning they show up sometimes at 1 a.m. And then I start noticing they start showing up at 12, then 11 p.m. He still orders his carne asada con todo. And she's beginning to add lemon to her order. I mean, that's big, adding a little bit of lemon. Remember, she was white. Well, anyway, I begin to notice that they eventually stop going to the club, but they still come and order their tacos. They've become regulars. Then, not giving it much attention, we slowly notice that they have not shown up in quite a while. And like anything else, we notice, but we just move on. But on one ordinary weekend, they show up. We were pretty surprised because it'd been a while, but we also were surprised and delighted to see that they had now a 2-year-old. Wow! My parents were so happy to see them and their little one. The other welcome surprise was that Pedro was now ordering his sesos. He went back to order his sesos. Perhaps that was part of the deal, right? If I give you a baby, you let me have my sesos back. Of course, that's the story I'm telling myself. But regardless, he started ordering sesos, and she had graduated to ordering her tacos with cilantro and cebolla. This was a big step forward. And the 2-year-old, she wasn't left behind. I mean, she was ordering her quesadillas. She loved quesadillas. A few months after their return, we noticed that Julie was showing another bump in her belly. And this time we didn't have to wait that long. They brought their newborn just weeks after she was born. It was really, really cool. And for the next decade or so, we got to see them grow. We get to see the girls ages 5 and 2, then 7 and 4, and 9 and 6. It was really cool. It was really cool to see them grow up. Unfortunately, one day, Pedro shows up, but he's alone. No Julie and no girls. I mean, this seems normal, right? It could happen. But there's something wrong. You could see it. He opens up to my dad. After all, my dad is the type of person who will ask, "Hey, how's it going? How you doing? How are the girls?" Pedro proceeds to tell my dad that he and Julie are in trouble. Their relationship is in trouble. She's asked him for a divorce. He says he's not one who will ever be divorced. Never. He's sticking to his vows. He made a promise to God. My dad figures out very quickly Pedro is not there for the Sesos. Pedro's there because he needs someone to talk to. Pedro tells my dad that she is no longer in love, that she wants to leave, and he's suspicious of another man. If you've ever been in that spot, you know that stomach-wrenching feeling that comes along with those thoughts that perhaps she's with another man. He says she's out most weekends. During the weekdays, she comes home late. She doesn't even put the girls to bed anymore. It's really sad. My dad has no advice. I mean, what could he say? My dad has never gone through this. What would he know? So he just listens. He listens and continues to listen. That's all my dad could do. As the months pass, Pedro comes by. He's starting to look a little better. He's not talking about her as much anymore. At some points, he even starts bringing his girls. After all, they love the quesadillas de harina. He looks better, but you could still see that there's a lot of pain. You can hear it. When he speaks, his lips still shiver. The mustache that once covered his smile is no longer there. Neither is the smile. And again, all my dad could do is listen. And she continues to hound him for divorce. And he continues to say no. No divorce. Mr. Ochoa, says one of the officers. Yes, how can I do for you? Pedro softly replies. Your wife has been in an accident. Can you come with us? What? Where? Who? And you could see these thoughts are racing through his mind. Recall, he was not asleep when that door knock came through, but he is still in disbelief, and he's very confused. He makes the necessary arrangements for someone to look after the girls while he goes to the hospital. It is then, while riding with the cops, that he learns the details. Julie was a passenger in a stolen car, along with another passenger. They were being chased. The driver, who Julie was seeing, lost control of the car. She flew out of the car as it flipped several times. The authorities found her body about 50 yards from where the wreckage came to a halt. The driver was nowhere to be found. The other passenger, deceased. By the time he got to the hospital, Pedro had learned she was in a coma. She was in bad shape. The doctors, could not tell him if she'd make it out of this. Five days pass. Julie gains consciousness, only to learn she is paralyzed from the neck down. She will never walk, and she will never move without help. She'd require 24-hour care from now on. She is no longer seeking a divorce. Pedro was stuck in a subway loop. A subway loop is redundancy. Imagine the train takes you back to the beginning every time it enters the subway. The exit is the entrance. A vicious cycle that never ends. A recurring nightmare. She wanted out. She left. He kept telling himself, though he couldn't hate her. But the affair? Damn, she almost died. This is just a never-ending nightmare. He thinks, how am I going to raise these girls without showing them that I don't hate her? How do I get out of this mental prison? For the next several months, he'd come by. He'd eat tacos. He'd talk with my dad. He just wanted to be listened to. He says he wants to build up the reserves, the emotional reserves that he's going to require to now tell her that he wants out of this marriage. He now wants a divorce. So he works up the strength to finally ask her. This, of course, made an already painful situation even more tragic. He would never get a chance to hear her response. She came down with an infection that ultimately took her life. She didn't have to tell him yes. How many heartbreaks can a heart take? Three things that stand out to me when I think of their story. 1. When someone confides in you, when somebody shares with you something very deep, something that they're going through, a lot of pain, turmoil, it is time to listen. Just listen. They may not be looking for answers. They may not be looking for anything else. They are just looking to be heard. 2. We are all susceptible. We're humans. There is somebody right now that probably is going to try methamphetamines for the first time, and they're well in their 40s. And as tragic as that sounds, they will do it. We are all susceptible. If we're human, we're susceptible. We will make mistakes, some more tragic than others. Please don't judge. And speaking of judging, 3, we simply do not know what she was going through before the accident and definitely after the accident. We simply don't know. I once heard someone say, when you don't know something, give it the kindest of interpretations, and that act will bring you closer to the truth. I found this to be very useful when I was going through my own problems, and as I was going through things that I just didn't know. And I found it useful in this situation. She wanted to stop hurting Pedro. I want to believe that. I believe that she had punished herself. That she had already punished herself so much for doing the things that she did. And eventually, I'm imagining that she punished herself for not being there for her girls, for her family, for her loved ones. She couldn't. I believe that she wanted to stop hurting Pedro. That though she was suffering, he was suffering even more. I believe her passing was the beginning for Pedro to start healing. That takes courage. That's bravery. Sometimes that takes life. Thank you for joining us on this latest episode of 10,000 Tacos. We hope you come back for our next episode. Until then, I'm Isidro Salas, and this is 10,000 Tacos.